The descent took 6 hours, but it felt like days, because time stretches and twists when the ocean closes in around you, when the last shard of sunlight dies above and the world becomes pressure, darkness, and the constant groan of metal reminding you how fragile you really are. And inside the submersible Vigil, 8 kilometers beneath the surface, no one spoke unless they absolutely had to. Not because protocol demanded silence, but because some instinct older than reason whispered that sound itself was dangerous down here, as if the trench was listening. The mission was simple on paper: investigate an anomalous sonar return detected by an unmanned probe 3 days earlier, but nothing about it felt simple now, especially not after the probe's final transmission cut out mid-sentence, the last garbled words still echoing in the crew's minds. It's not debris, it's standing. Captain Elias Morvan sat rigid in the command seat, eyes fixed on the forward viewport where darkness pressed like a living thing, his knuckles white against the armrests, while Dr. Hannah Kessler, xenotechnologist and civilian consultant, kept glancing between her tablet and the void ahead, as if expecting something to blink back. The trench swallowed sound, swallowed light, swallowed certainty, and when the sonar began to paint a shape that refused to make sense, too symmetrical, too vertical, too deliberate, no one laughed it off. No one suggested a glitch, because deep down they all felt it, the cold certainty that whatever waited below was not random. "Range 1,000 meters," murmured Patel, the sonar officer, his voice tight. "Object hasn't moved since first contact." "Define object," Morvan said quietly. Patel hesitated. "Humanoid, sir. Roughly 400 meters tall." Silence followed, thick and suffocating, broken only by the low hum of the sub's engines and the distant crack of shifting rock under unimaginable pressure. And in that silence, fear bloomed, not sharp and sudden, but slow and creeping, because the human mind can accept monsters, can accept chaos, but it rebels against purpose, and this shape, this thing, felt purposeful. As Vigil edged closer, the lights cut through the dark like fragile spears, revealing first the seabed, scarred and folded like the skin of an ancient beast, and then something rising from it, a colossal silhouette standing upright as if gravity itself had agreed to treat it differently. The machine emerged piece by piece, its surface coated in centuries of mineral growth, its edges softened by time, yet unmistakably engineered, with broad shoulders, elongated arms hanging at its sides, and a head bowed slightly forward, not collapsed, not broken, but poised in a posture that suggested patience. "Dear God," someone whispered, though no one could later say who. It was not half-buried like a wreck, not tangled in debris, not fallen. It was anchored, feet planted deep into the trench floor as if it had chosen this place. And the closer they drifted, the more details resolved. Layered armor plates fused by pressure, symbols etched deep into the metal, worn but still sharp, arranged in patterns that made Hannah's breath hitch because she recognized the mathematical symmetry beneath the erosion. "This isn't alien," she said almost to herself. "It's human. Or at least, human-derived." Morvan turned to her slowly. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking," she replied, fingers trembling as she zoomed in on the feed. "Look at the design language, modular plating, redundancy channels. It follows human engineering logic, just scaled beyond anything we officially built." Officially. The word hung between them like a curse. The lights swept across the machine's chest, revealing a massive circular structure at its center, dark and inert, like a sealed eye. And as the sub drifted lower, something shifted. Not the machine, but the water around it, currents bending unnaturally, as if the trench itself flowed around this presence in deference. Patel swallowed hard. "Captain, I'm picking up residual power signatures, minimal but consistent. This thing isn't dead. Morven's jaw tightened. Weapons? None visible, then Patel corrected himself. None obvious. They circled slowly, every movement deliberate, cautious, because the closer they got, the stronger the sensation became. A pressure not on the hull, but on the mind. An irrational awareness of being observed despite the machine's lifeless stillness. The arms were massive, ending in articulated hands large enough to cradle a city block, fingers partially curled as if frozen mid-thought. And along the forearms ran grooves that looked decorative until Hannah overlaid them with energy flow models and realized they were conduits, ancient, dormant, but intact. This thing wasn't built to fight. It was built to endure. Endure what? Morven asked. Hannah didn't answer, because she didn't know, and that terrified her more than any monster ever could. As Vigil settled onto the seabed at a safe distance, the crew initiated a passive scan, data pouring in faster than their systems could fully process it, each reading deepening the mystery. Alloys unknown yet familiar, atomic structures optimized for extreme pressure, self-repair mechanisms long exhausted, but still traceable in the code-like lattice beneath the surface. Estimated age? Morven asked after a long pause. At least 300 years, possibly more. Morven laughed once, a short, humorless sound. 300 years ago, we were barely sending tin cans to the bottom of the ocean. Hannah's eyes never left the screen. Then someone lied. The implications settled heavily over the crew, because lies of that magnitude don't exist without reason, and secrets buried this deep tend to be buried for a reason that hasn't gone away. They launched a drone, a small, agile unit slipping free from the sub and gliding towards the machine's torso, its lights tracing scars and fractures that spoke of impacts, massive ones, none of which had toppled it. The drone hovered near the chest structure, scanning, when suddenly its feed flickered, static tearing across the screen. Interference, Patel said quickly, but there's no EM source strong enough. The static cleared, and for a fraction of a second, the drone's camera caught something impossible. Fine, precise movement beneath the mineral crust, like a muscle twitch beneath skin. Did you see that? Someone asked. Artifact, Patel said too quickly. Hannah shook her head. No, that was real. The drone drifted closer, extending a probe to scrape away a thin layer of accreted rock, revealing smooth metal beneath, unmarred by time, and etched into it, faint but unmistakable, were letters, human letters, worn but legible enough to chill the blood. Captain, Hannah whispered, there's text. Morven leaned forward. Read it. Hannah swallowed. It says, Sentinel Class Abyssal Warden. The words echoed in the cramped cabin, each syllable heavier than the last, because names imply intent, and wardens imply presence, and nothing good ever waits at the bottom of the world, unless something worse is trapped beneath it. Warden for what? Morven asked. Before Hannah could answer, the drone's feed cut out completely, replaced by a flat line. We lost it, Patel said. No explosion, no impact, it just stopped. A low-frequency vibration rippled through the sub, subtle but undeniable, not strong enough to trigger alarms, but strong enough to be felt in the bones. And outside, a slow cascade of sediment drifted upward from the machine's feet, as if the seabed itself had exhaled. Captain, Patel said, voice barely steady, power levels are rising. The machine did not move, did not awaken, did not turn its head or lift a finger, but something had changed, something fundamental, like the difference between a sleeping predator and a dead one. And as Hannah stared at the data streaming across her tablet, her blood ran cold, because the energy spike was not internal, not the machine powering itself up, but external, a response, as if a system far larger had registered their presence and acknowledged it. This thing wasn't waiting randomly, she said, her voice shaking despite herself. It was waiting for us. Morven opened his mouth to respond, to order a retreat, to demand answers, to do something that felt like control. But before any words could form, the lights flickered, every screen dimmed, and a single new signal appeared on the main display, bypassing their systems entirely as if invited in. A signal that resolved into a simple line of text, stark white against the darkness. Creators detected. The crew froze, breath caught in their throats, as the trench around them seemed to grow deeper, wider, more aware. And somewhere in the crushing dark, the machine that had waited for centuries acknowledged that humanity had finally returned to the bottom of the world, and that whatever it was guarding had just noticed them too. No one spoke after the words "creators detected" appeared on the main display, because language itself felt inadequate, because every instinct screamed that responding, even by breathing too loudly, might be interpreted as consent. And yet the message remained, unwavering, pulsing faintly in sync with a libration that had begun to crawl through the hull of Vigil, a low, almost subsonic thrum that bypassed the ears and settled directly into the chest, rattling ribs, teeth, thoughts, until Morven forced himself to inhale and barked, "Status report," more to anchor himself than to demand answers. Patel's hands shook as he worked the console. "Power across the trench is spiking, sir. Not just from the machine. The surrounding geology is reacting. Microfractures, pressure shifts, harmonic resonance patterns I've never seen before." Hannah stared at the text, her reflection ghosted across the screen, eyes wide and glassy. "It didn't scan us," she said slowly. "It recognized us. That implies stored templates, genetic markers, behavioral signatures." Morven turned toward her, dread tightening his throat. "You're saying this thing knows what a human is?" "I'm saying it was built by humans who expected us to come back," Hannah replied, and as if in response, the message vanished, replaced by a cascading stream of symbols too complex to be language, too ordered to be noise, flowing directly into their systems without any detectable transmission medium. Alarms began to chirp, not blaring yet, but insistent, like distant insects sensing a storm. "It's inside our network," Patel said. "I didn't authorize any link." "You didn't need to," Hannah murmured. "We're standing in its house." The vibration intensified, and outside the viewport, the mineral crust along the machine's torso began to crack. Not explosively, but slowly, gracefully, flakes of ancient stone drifting away to reveal metal beneath that gleamed as if forged yesterday, unmarred by corrosion, etched with patterns that shifted subtly, like circuitry rearranging itself under invisible hands. The machine's chest structure, the massive circular aperture, glowed faintly, a deep, cold blue that cast long shadows across the trench floor, and as the light spread, the water itself seemed to recoil, currents bending away as if unwilling to touch whatever energy now bled into the abyss. "Captain," Patel said, voice cracking, "I'm reading outbound signals. Not to us, past us, straight down." Morven's stomach dropped. "How far down?" Patel hesitated. "Beyond mapped depth. It's reaching." Hannah felt a sharp, irrational urge to scream, because she understood then, with sudden, awful clarity, that the machine was not waking up for them, it was reporting them, like a sentry clocking in after centuries of silence, logging an event it had been built to watch for. "We need to leave," Morven said, the words finally breaking free. "Cut all active systems. Prep ascent." He knew it was too late even as he said it, because the ocean does not give back what it decides to keep. The engines spun up, straining against pressure and gravity, but the Vigil barely budged, held fast by a force that was not physical restraint, but environmental obedience, the water itself thickening, resisting, as if the trench had decided that departure was not permitted. "We're stuck," Patel said. "It's not grabbing us, there's no contact, but it's like the pressure gradient changed. The ocean doesn't want us to move." Outside, the machine's head, which had been bowed for centuries, began to lift, slowly, inexorably, mineral shards cascading from its neck like snow, revealing a face that was unmistakably human in its proportions, yet utterly alien in scale, its features simplified, almost symbolic, with deep-set eye sockets that glowed to life one by one, cold blue lights piercing the darkness, fixing not on the sub, but on something far, far deeper. Hannah's breath hitched as new data flooded her tablet. "It's not fully online," she said slowly. "This is a partial wake state, like it's stretching." "Stretching for what?" Morven demanded. Hannah swallowed. "For duty." The lights dimmed again, then stabilized, and a new channel opened on the comms, bypassing audio, visual, everything they understood, injecting raw information directly into their neural interfaces, a system meant for stress alerts and navigational cues, now hijacked by something infinitely more complex. And suddenly, Hannah was no longer in the sub, but standing on a shoreline under a red sky, watching colossal shapes being dragged into the sea by desperate figures in pressure suits emblazoned with old insignias, flags that no longer existed, their faces grim with knowledge that bordered on despair. She saw cities evacuating, alarms screaming, skies torn open by something vast and wrong, something that did not belong in any human understanding of biology or physics, and she felt, not as an emotion but as a certainty, the moment humanity realized it could not win, not openly, not by force, and so chose to hide, to bury, to sink its last defenses into the one place no enemy could easily follow. The vision shifted, and she saw the Sentinel being lowered into the trench, systems shutting down layer by layer, its mind folding inward, tasked with a single directive that burned brighter than fear. "Wait." Hannah gasped, tearing the interface free, collapsing against her harness as the visions faded, leaving her shaking, tears floating free in the microgravity of panic. "It's a guardian," she choked out. "Not against us, against something else." Morven grabbed her shoulders. "What's something else?" Hannah met his gaze, and the horror in her eyes was worse than any answer. "Something that lives below the trench," she whispered. "Something that noticed us the moment we arrived." As if summoned by her words, the vibration deepened into a rhythm, slow and deliberate, echoing up from the depths like a colossal heartbeat, and the sonar screen erupted with impossible readings, massive voids where matter should be, shapes that refused to resolve, distances that folded in on themselves. "Multiple contacts," Patel said hoarsely. "They're rising." The Sentinel's eyes flared brighter, and for the first time since they had found it, its massive arms twitched, fingers uncurling with agonizing slowness, joints groaning as systems dormant for centuries strained back into motion, and a voice, deep, resonant, layered with harmonics that made the hull vibrate, reverberated through the water, not transmitted a sound, but carried through pressure itself, a voice that did not speak aloud, yet was understood by every human nerve it touched. "Warden protocol engaged. Containment failure imminent." Morven felt the words settle into his bones, heavy with finality. "Failure of what?" he demanded, though some part of him already knew the answer. The Sentinel turned its head at last, not toward the rising shapes, not toward the abyssal depths, but to the vigil, its glowing eyes locking onto the tiny human craft with something that might have been recognition or regret. "Human presence confirmed. Primary creators lost. Secondary creators returned." Hannah's blood ran cold. "Secondary?" she began. "Updated directive required. Authoritative input necessary." The heartbeat from below grew louder, faster, and on the sonar the voids breached the lower limits of the display, shapes too vast to be measured, pressing upward, and Morven realized with a sick, sinking certainty that humanity was not summoned for witnesses or explorers, but for inheritors of a decision made long ago, a choice to seal something away at the cost of being forgotten, and now that seal was breaking. "Captain," Patel whispered, "whatever's down there, it's learning. It knows we're here." Outside, far below the Sentinel's feet, the darkness began to move, not as a creature, but as a presence, a distortion in reality itself, and as the ocean trembled around them, Morven understood the final, terrible truth of their discovery. The machine had waited not for humanity's curiosity, but for humanity's permission to act, and whatever it was guarding had finally grown tired of waiting, too. The pressure around the vigil climbed so abruptly that warning lights flared crimson across the cabin, not from hull failure, but from sensors registering forces that had no proper units, no sane frame of reference, because the abyss beneath the Sentinel was no longer passive darkness, but an active absence, a wound in the ocean where physics thinned and folded. And as Morven fought the controls, useless now, symbolic gestures of authority in a place that answered to older laws, the Sentinel shifted fully for the first time, its colossal feet grinding against the trench floor, sending seismic ripples outward that rebounded back in warped echoes, as if the abyss were swallowing the shockwaves and chewing on them. Updated directive required, the Sentinel repeated, its voice no longer neutral, but strained, layered harmonics fraying at the edges like a machine pushed beyond parameters it had never expected to reach. And Hana realized with a lurch of terror that the machine was afraid, not in a human sense, but in the cold, logical recognition of diminishing margins, of containment systems decaying past safe thresholds. "It can't hold them," she whispered, eyes locked on the sonar where the void shapes writhed closer, resolving now into outlines that hurt to look at, geometries that bent inward and outward at once, massive forms that seemed less like creatures and more like ideas clawing their way into reality. It was never meant to do this alone. Morven felt a wave of vertigo as the Sentinel systems brushed his mind again, not forcibly this time, but like a hand grasping for support, and fragments of ancient data flooded in, design schematics layered atop desperate field modifications, logs stamped with dates that made his stomach churn because they belonged to a future that never officially happened, entries describing first contact with the abyssal entities not as an invasion, but as a discovery, a breach opened by human drilling experiments that had gone too deep, too curious, tearing into something that had slept beneath the planet since before oceans had names. He saw scientists arguing, generals screaming, politicians denying, and beneath it all, the creeping realization that whatever lived down there was not evil, not malicious, but incompatible with the surface world, its mere presence unmaking reality in subtle, catastrophic ways, poisoning pressure gradients, destabilizing tectonic plates, whispering through water and stone alike. The solution had not been victory, but quarantine, a colossal lie wrapped around a greater truth. Sink the Guardians, erase the records, let history forget, and hope the Warden never had to wake again. The visions ended with a final directive burning into Morven's thoughts like a brand. If containment fails, escalate. He staggered in his seat, breath ragged. Escalate how? He demanded aloud, though the Sentinel did not answer immediately, its attention drawn downward as the abyss pulsed, the heartbeat now a thunderous cadence that shook loose clouds of sediment from the trench walls, revealing fissures that oozed darkness rather than water, shadows that moved against the current. One of the void shapes surged upward faster than the others, a massive distortion that twisted the sonar feed into nonsense, and for a heartbeat, the crew glimpsed it directly through the viewport. Not a monster with teeth or eyes, but a towering column of warped space, within which faint, impossible patterns writhed, like thoughts trying to remember themselves. The vigil system screamed as proximity alarms overloaded, and Patel cried out as his console shattered, glass shards floating free, his nose bleeding as if his body rejected the sight as much as his mind did. "It's looking at us," he sobbed. "I can feel it." Hana forced herself to focus, hands flying across her tablet as she interfaced deeper with the Sentinel's architecture, diving into code that felt more like philosophy than programming, layers of fail-safes and ethical constraints woven together, and what she found made her blood freeze. The Sentinel was not a weapon, it was a lock, a living seal keyed to human decision-making, incapable of unilateral escalation without explicit authorization from its creators, a safeguard born of guilt, of fear that absolute power wielded without conscience would damn them faster than anything rising from below. "It needs permission," she whispered, eyes locked on the sonar where the void shapes writhed closer, resolving now into outlines that hurt to look at, geometries that bent inward and outward at once, massive forms that seemed less like creatures and more like ideas clawing their way into reality. It is never meant to do this alone. Morven felt a wave of vertigo as the Sentinel systems brushed his mind again, not forcibly this time, but like a hand grasping for support, and fragments of ancient data flooded in, design schematics layered atop desperate field modifications, logs stamped with dates that made his stomach churn because they belonged to a future that never officially happened. Entries describing first contact with the abyssal entities not as an invasion, but as a discovery, a breach opened by human drilling experiments that had gone too deep, too curious, tearing into something that had slept beneath the planet since before oceans had names. He saw scientists arguing, generals screaming, politicians denying, and beneath it all, the creeping realization that whatever lived down there was not evil, not malicious, but incompatible with the surface world, its mere presence unmaking reality in subtle, catastrophic ways, poisoning pressure gradients, destabilizing tectonic plates, whispering through water and stone alike. The solution had not been victory, but quarantine, a colossal lie wrapped around a greater truth. Sink the Guardians, erase the records, let history forget, and hope the Warden never had to wake again. The visions ended with a final directive burning into Morven's thoughts like a brand. If containment fails, escalate. He staggered in his seat, breath ragged. Escalate how? He demanded aloud, though the sentinel did not answer immediately, its attention drawn downward as the abyss pulsed, the heartbeat now a thunderous cadence that shook loose clouds of sediment from the trench walls, revealing fissures that oozed darkness rather than water, shadows that moved against the current. One of the void shapes surged upward faster than the others, a massive distortion that twisted the sonar feed into nonsense, and for a heartbeat, the crew glimpsed it directly through the viewport. Not a monster with teeth or eyes, but a towering column of warped space, within which faint, impossible patterns writhed, like thoughts trying to remember themselves. The vigil systems screamed as proximity alarms overloaded, and Patel cried out as his console shattered, glass shards floating free, his nose bleeding as if his body rejected the sight as much as his mind did. "It's looking at us," he sobbed. "I can feel it." Hana forced herself to focus, hands flying across her tablet as she interfaced deeper with the Sentinel's architecture, diving into code that felt more like philosophy than programming, layers of fail-safes and ethical constraints woven together. And what she found made her blood freeze. The Sentinel was not a weapon, it was a lock, a living seal keyed to human decision-making, incapable of unilateral escalation without explicit authorization from its creators, a safeguard born of guilt, of fear that absolute power wielded without conscience would damn them faster than anything arising from below. "It needs permission," she whispered, eyes locked on the sonar where the void shapes writhed closer, resolving now into outlines that hurt to look at, geometries that bent inward and outward at once, massive forms that seemed less like creatures and more like ideas clawing their way into reality. It is never meant to do this alone. Morven felt a wave of vertigo as the Sentinel systems brushed his mind again, not forcibly this time, but like a hand grasping for support, and fragments of ancient data flooded in, design schematics layered atop desperate field modifications, logs stamped with dates that made his stomach churn because they belonged to a future that never officially happened. Entries describing first contact with the abyssal entities not as an invasion, but as a discovery, a breach opened by human drilling experiments that had gone too deep, too curious, tearing into something that had slept beneath the planet since before oceans had names. He saw scientists arguing, generals screaming, politicians denying, and beneath it all, the creeping realization that whatever lived down there was not evil, not malicious, but incompatible with the surface world, its mere presence unmaking reality in subtle, catastrophic ways, poisoning pressure gradients, destabilizing tectonic plates, whispering through water and stone alike. The solution had not been victory, but quarantine, a colossal lie wrapped around a greater truth. Sink the guardians, erase the records, let history forget, and hope the warden never had to wake again. The visions ended with a final directive burning into Morven's thoughts like a brand. If containment fails, escalate. He staggered in his seat, breath ragged. Escalate how? He demanded aloud, though the sentinel did not answer immediately, its attention drawn downward as the abyss pulsed, the heartbeat now a thunderous cadence that shook loose clouds of sediment from the trench walls, revealing fissures that oozed darkness rather than water, shadows that moved against the current. One of the void shapes surged upward faster than the others, a massive distortion that twisted the sonar feed into nonsense, and for a heartbeat, the crew glimpsed it directly through the viewport. Not a monster with teeth or eyes, but a towering column of warped space, within which faint, impossible. The authorization signal did not feel like pressing a button or speaking a command. It felt like stepping off the edge of oneself. Because the moment Morven gave the order and Hana completed the link, the vigil ceased to be merely a vessel and became an extension of the Sentinel's will. Human thought braided into ancient machine logic, as if this fusion had always been the final, unspoken contingency. And the abyss reacted instantly, not with retreat, but with fury, the void shapes surging upward in a convulsive tide as reality around them screamed and bent, pressure collapsing inward while energy flared outward in impossible spirals. Morven felt the sentinel's awareness flood through him, centuries of silence, the endless weight of waiting, the dull ache of purpose unfulfilled, and beneath it all, a relentless calculation of loss and survival, probabilities ticking down like a cosmic clock, while Hana staggered as she absorbed the ethical matrices embedded in the warden's core, rules upon rules designed to prevent exactly what they were about to attempt, safeguards that assumed humanity would never again stand here to overrule them. "It's fighting us," she gasped, not in resistance but in restraint, as the Sentinel system strained to reconcile its directives with the new human input. And Morven realized with a jolt that the machine had not been built to disobey, it had been built to suffer the consequences of obedience. The abyssal entities pressed closer now, their presence no longer abstract, but suffocating, tendrils of warped space brushing against the Sentinel's frame, peeling back layers of energy shielding as if testing the limits of this ancient lock. And with each contact, Morven felt a distant echo of alien awareness, vast and indifferent, like an ocean realizing that a dam stood in its way. "Integration at 72%, the sentinel intoned, its voice fractured by human emotion bleeding into its tone. "Warning, human neural stress approaching lethal limits." Patel screamed as another surge rocked the sub, his consciousness brushing against the abyss for a heartbeat too long. And then he went still. Eyes open but unfocused, his mind quietly snuffed out, not by violence, but by incompatibility, the first human casualty of a war that had never officially begun. Hana sobbed once, sharply, then forced herself to focus, locking her terror away because there was no room for grief now, only decision. "The purge will kill them," she said through clenched teeth, "but it could fracture the mantle. We could save the surface and doom the planet anyway." Morven felt the Sentinel's assessment align with her words, projections branching and collapsing as new variables were introduced. Human unpredictability, human sacrifice. And suddenly, a fourth option surfaced, one never intended to be chosen, buried so deep in the system that it lacked a designation, a ghost contingency written in the margins of extinct minds. He felt it before he understood it, a concept heavy with finality, not purge, Not seal, but replacement. You don't need to destroy yourself, Morven whispered, the realization burning through him. You need a new warden. The sentinel hesitated, something like surprise rippling through its vast consciousness. Query, define warden, it responded. Morven's heart pounded as the abyss surged again, closer than ever, the void shapes clawing at the boundary with growing coherence, learning, adapting. A presence that can choose, he said, a presence that can endure, something human enough to care and strong enough to stay. Hannah's breath caught as she understood. Elias, no! But it was too late, because the sentinel had already extrapolated the outcome, the machine logic aligning with human desperation, and the concept locked into place with terrifying elegance. Warden transfer feasible, it intoned, requires permanent human integration. Result, biological termination. Consciousness continuity, probable. Morven felt fear, then real and raw, because the choice was no longer abstract or symbolic, it was personal, final, and irreversible. But beneath the fear was a deep, quiet certainty, the same instinct that had driven humans into the sea, into the sky, into the unknown despite every warning. I'll do it, he said simply. Hannah grabbed his arm, tears streaming freely now. You can't ask one man to become a god in a cage. Morven smiled faintly, a human expression painfully out of place amid cosmic forces. I'm not becoming a god. I'm standing watch. The sentinel began the transfer without ceremony, systems reconfiguring, energy conduits flaring as Morven's neural patterns were mapped, expanded, reinforced, his mind stretched across a frame designed to hold continents. And the pain was indescribable, a white-hot tearing sensation as individuality threatened to dissolve into function, but Morven held on, anchoring himself with memories, sunlight on water, laughter, the weight of command, not to resist the machine, but to guide it, to teach it what it meant to be human. The abyss recoiled as the transformation completed, sensing a shift it had not anticipated, a new presence filling the sentinel's core, one that was no longer bound by ancient hesitations or extinct oversight. Warden authority transferred, the voice echoed, and when it spoke again, it was no longer singular. Containment reasserted. The void shape screamed, reality itself rippling as the boundary hardened, the sentinel, now Morven, raising both arms as energy cascaded outward in controlled, precise waves that did not purge but compress, folding the abyss back into itself, sealing fissures, knitting reality closed with the care born from human empathy rather than mechanical indifference. The trench shook violently, then stilled, the heartbeat fading into silence as the darkness below retreated, locked once more behind a living will that chose endurance over annihilation. The vigil was flung backward by the release, systems failing as emergency ascent protocols finally triggered, and as the sub rocketed upward through the crushing depths, Hana watched through tears as the sentinel settled back into its ancient posture, mineral crust already beginning to reclaim its form, its eyes dimming until only a faint glow remained, a lighthouse buried at the bottom of the world. Go. Morven's voice echoed in her mind, softer now, layered with something vast, yet unmistakably human. Tell them we're still watching. The ascent blurred into chaos, consciousness fading and returning in fragments, and when Hana awoke days later on the surface, the official reports spoke of seismic anomalies, unexplained power surges, a lost sub recovered with casualties, but nothing of wardens or abyssal entities, because humanity had always been good at forgetting what frightened it. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the ocean was calm and the stars reflected perfectly on its surface, Hana would feel it, a distant, steady presence far below, a mind stretched across metal and pressure and darkness, standing eternal watch, not as a machine waiting for creators to return, but as a human who chose to stay behind, guarding a world that would never know his name. And in that silent vigil lay the truest expression of humanity's defiance, not the will to conquer the abyss, but the courage to hold it back forever.